a thorn in your flesh may actually be a gift from God. How? Let's talk about it with Dr. Daniel Bush on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we are so glad you're here. You have a seat at our table. Always, you're just not allowed to talk. But we recognize the gift you give us by giving us an hour of your life, and we try not to waste it. If you were wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy, and Matthew Porter, who's our executive producer. Matthew doesn't need a lot of French fries. He just needs to know when he's about to eat the last French fry.
You got to know how to you ever reach for them and you're like, that was the last one.
Yeah. It's a
failed to
sad
enjoy
moment,
that.
isn't it?
It's a bad feeling.
Yeah.
Matthew,
Worse when you get home and there's no ketchup.
Oh, I know. And Matthew, it's a hard world. Our producer, Jinx, is in the little glass booth. Jinx, you have French fries for lunch?
I did not. I've got
Cheez-Its, okay.
I didn't have time to go get French fries, and Matt didn't bring me.
How do they go with ketchup?
I was out.
Our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in the tech bunker. John edits out any mistakes we make, and that's why this program is so short.
Just thinking that.
And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. George suggests we combine, I don't know if I can say, that we combine Valentine's Day with Tax Day, then you can kiss your money goodbye.
I like it.
And Kathy Wyatt is, of course, the soft feminine side of the program. I remember getting a call that Kathy was in the hospital. I asked about her condition. They said she's critical. And I said, well, you'll get used to it. I'm sorry. I don't like this stuff.
It's okay.
All in the delivery.
I just read it.
Yeah, he warned me.
I stand by that one.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Matthew warned me.
I told him to tell you before I said it, because I don't want to see blood and carnage in this studio. Our guest is a long, many-year friend of mine, Dr. Daniel Bush. Dan is an author. He has pioneered a unique and integrated approach to Christian psychotherapy. 2 or 3 years ago, I was doing teaching a seminar at the Billy Graham training session in the mountains of North Carolina, and Dan happened to be there. And I had him come up in the middle of my teaching, and I said, Dan, tell me what you're doing and how it's going to help people. And he blew people away. So a unique and integrated approach to Christian psychotherapy. We'll get into that. He also founded Everglade Psychotherapy Group to cultivate healing and growth for those who have experienced developmental and complex trauma. Daniel has written several books, one of which, would you hand it to me? One of which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers is titled Undefeated, Discovering God Undefended. Give me a minute, I'll get it.
You're the defeated.
Undefended, Discovering God When Your Guard is Down. Dan, thank you for taking time. We have gotten together and decided this hour is going to be a therapy session. And some of us really need fixing, and all of us need help. So we expect you not only to answer questions, but to produce healing and wholeness, which is a major task in the staff of this particular program. Listen, I know we're not talking about the book. In fact, you were on, I think, and we talked about Undefended, which is
sure
a
did.
great book. It really is. It's the kind of book that is life-changing. If you're always defending yourself, always getting back, it is a relief, a burden lifted to know you don't have to do that God does it a lot better than you do. But let's talk, tell us about the book and how it started, and then we'll get into the seminar.
All right. So the book really began during a really difficult period of my life when I was going through a failing marriage. I was just came off the mission field from China back into the United States, and I had come to a church that was failing. It was shrinking in size, and I was going through a lot trying to find out who I was in God and what this was really all about with all the difficulty. And I was learning a lot about pressing into God and being okay in that relationship. And I began to write chapters, one following the other, about different places in your life that you would like to play hooky from, like pain and doubt and fear and these things. And I began to explore what's it like to press into those moments and to find out that God is enough for you in those places, to be undefended before God and what he has to show you and what the work that he's doing in you through traversing all of those valleys of the shadow of death that we would rather run from.
And then a seminar is quite different than a book. I would think that after you wrote the book, you ought to say, well, that's enough if you really want to know about these things. And it's a wonderful book, by the way. Read the book. But now you're doing a seminar. How did you get from the book to the seminar?
Interesting question. And you have a lot to do with that. So there was a pastor down in Florida, a wonderful man, and not too far away from where you are. He was reading the book, and he said to his secretary one day, find out who this guy is and if he's got any more material, because this book is speaking to me. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but I mean, that was the point of the book. And so he reached out to me, and I said, well, I don't have a seminar. I don't have any other training materials or anything like that. I just got the book. But I'm a psychotherapist, and I also do spiritual direction. So he began to meet with me. We met a couple of times a month, and then we met once a month for about 6 to 9 months. And I remember talking to you, Steve, and I said, this guy asked me for this, that, and the other thing. He said, don't tell him that. Tell him you do. So, I spent a year trying to dissect the book and condense it and write it up into 4 seminar lectures about, 60 to 90 minutes in length. And we first took it on the road back to that pastor's church in Gainesville, Florida, and it was a wonderful time. So that's how the seminar got going. You kicked me in the pants.
Well, but I was gentle.
You were gentle.
Yeah, but I really saw in this something that was plain amazing and life-changing in churches and in church groups and in groups of Christians. And I'm going to give you some information how you can find out about it a little bit later on. I'm just curious. What's the difference between writing for people and talking to them face to face? And is it more powerful when you have a face to face in a seminar than the book was?
I mean, I think it is. Writing a book and sitting with a book allows you to slow down and dissect, especially if you're reading it for yourself. But being in a seminar, there's a pathos of that moment. There's a vibe, there's a spirit in the room, in the place where you are hearing somebody, share from their heart and their own stories. And I've got lots of stories in the seminar from all over the place, not just my own stuff, but and to have that hit you in the moment and to be together with others in fellowship, taking it in. And then sometimes what we do in some of the seminar offerings is they have breakout groups where they turn immediately and begin to discuss what they just heard. So there's something very powerful about receiving it as a group live. And then people can go to the book and they can dive in deeper and spend a little bit more time processing it.
As a result of the seminar, have you thought maybe I ought to go back and edit the book and say some things different?
No, I haven't, but
You-
it's too much work. I'm lazy. I thought about writing many other books, and I'm actually working on a book right now. I'm teaching a Sunday school class on the songs of ascent, and I figured, like, what I would do every week as I prepare for that, I will prepare the chapter for publication as well, and that allows me to touch other points that maybe could have been added to the book. The book is already an inch thick. I mean, like, that's a brick.
Guys, we're going to continue with this conversation on the other side of the break. It's a great book, but it's also, as Dan has described to you, it's a great seminar. When you have a chance to flesh it out, to think about it, to ask questions, to balance it, to listen to the wisdom and apply it to yourself. If you're a pastor, you might want to get, and I'll give you some information later on, you might want to check this out for your church. It could be a church-changing situation. Who knows? I might go to that seminar. And then a lot of people have been praying for me to be saved. It might happen at the Undefended seminar. Hey, thanks for being a part of this. We're talking with author Dr. Daniel Bush about his seminar, a life-changing seminar based on his book called Undefended, Discovering God When Your Guard is Down.
I want to talk more about the seminar, and we'll get to all that stuff. But I wanted to go back to something that Steve mentioned in the intro that caught my attention about your it sounds like kind of a unique approach to psychotherapy. I wonder if you just tell us a little bit more about that, because that's a fascinating practice, a fascinating subject.
Well, sure, no problem. For Christian clients, because I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor, so I see Christians and non-Christians. For Christian counselors who want their Christian faith, Christian clients who want their Christian faith integrated, what I do differently is not to find a Bible verse and then smack him with it and say, now go and stop it and do it again. Bob Newhart was funny with that, and I use that sometimes. But in reality, what I like to do is the same thing that this book is doing, is I drill down to the most difficult places of their woundedness and help them to see how God is sufficient for them in that place, and to develop together with God in that relationship a secure attachment. Now, a lot of psychotherapists know all about secure attachment, and they want to do that with their clients, but they don't bring another attachment finger into it. They make it attachment with yourself, and there's something to be said about that. But for Christian clients, one of the most secure attachment figures you ought to have probably is the Lord himself. So as we are working on trauma and difficult things in life, I try to use that idea from attachment theory and connect it with a person's relationship with the Lord.
You use music, don't you, and other means when you do this sort of thing?
When I'm doing trauma therapy, I use a method called havening, and sometimes I also use EMDR. Both of them are well known, and both of them do something in the mind, which is to create delta waves, which tells your brain you're in a safe place. You're not in the trauma anymore. There are ways to create those delta waves through touch, through bilateral eye stimulation, and also through music. And we try to bring all that in, utilizing your five senses to them as much as we can. So sound, right? Touch, eye movement. These are some of the senses that we want to to tell the brain I'm in a safe place, and that will delink the emotional charge from the traumatic memory.
How do you do that? Well, let's talk about safety. How do you do that in a seminar?
In a seminar, well,
I mean,
get everybody.
if I go to your seminar and I don't feel safe, frankly, a lot, how's the seminar going to deal with my insecurity at that point?
I was going to say something cheeky, like I make everybody stand up, shake hands, and give each other a hug. We don't do that. You don't have to be scared of that. But how do we bring about? Well, I think what the seminar does is a lot of teaching and then discussion. But I do ask people to think throughout the seminar. Think of a time when. Connect with this story here. So they're going into their hard places to find specifically an issue, and then a seminar is an oral delivery. So more than, I'm not having one-on-one trauma therapy with anybody, but what I am going to do is cognitively ask them to look at things a little bit differently. And we know, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is effective. It's not the only thing that's effective, but that's effective. Change your thoughts, your emotions will follow. So one of the things we want to do is help people to think about what they're going through differently. And I want them to think about how they're going through those things together with the Lord. And if they're holding the Lord out as some religious thing that they're doing, I'm going to church, I'm doing communion, and I'm listening to the word, and I'm reading my Bible, and all of those are wonderful things to do. I ask them to think about spiritual a little bit different, to think of it in terms of relationship. How is the relationship with God coming to bear in this very moment with them on the issue that they brought to mind, and to find it within him, that security. And we spent a lot of time in this seminar trying to flesh that out and to bring people along to deeply understanding his presence in their life. And I think a lot of people need to be reminded and aware and brought into touch with God's presence.
Good stuff.
Well, and Dan, when you talk about safety, it's that you're trusting ultimately that you're safe with God. I mean, you're not going to make everybody healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? In the seminar.
No, I don't have a Harry Potter wand. I wish I had one. I'd use it on myself first. No, trusting God. Larry Crabb wrote a book many years ago about finding God, and that book's all about trusting God, trusting that God's good, which means if you trust that God's good, and then he's sovereign, and he's omniscient and omnipresent, then maybe you ought to trust that whatever you're going through right now is not catching God off guard. Therefore, it begs the question, what are you doing in my life through this moment?
You think
I want them to ask that question.
Do you think most Christians fear God and are afraid that he's ticked at them because they haven't been faithful or obedient or good?
There is a fair number of folks that definitely do that. They're afraid, and they want to get their religion right so they can get something from God. And there's another group that see God, not as the mean one, but as God has no standards for me. But then they find that, where's God in my life? If God's just watching, then they're not connecting with him either. Everything's good. God's all love, which is true, but he's also justice. He's also peace. He's all these things. He's all these attributes simultaneously and held in perfect balance. So we've got both people on both sides. God is mad at me, but then God doesn't really care and everything's okay. So I think both of them are missing the presence of God, that connection, deepest connection.
And you address that in the seminar with the truth of with biblical truth, right?
Definitely biblical truth, biblical theology. We unpack some passages. We look at, systematic theology, but I do that through story. I do that through, telling the stories that are in Scripture, and then asking people to pause for a moment and look at what does that mean. Now, we know what that means. How does that relate to me in my world? Why is it okay for me to hug this cactus that hurts so much, knowing that the Lord is hugging me?
Oh, man, we're going to get into specifics. How long does the seminar take?
Well, we designed it to be 4 lectures or 4 seminar talks. And I, as you probably figured out through this, our time together today, I'm a bit long-winded. So those things end up taking somewhere between 60 and 75 minutes apiece. So you can do the math on that. But we're not quite at 90 minutes.
And if you tape it and run it fast, you can probably get through in 5 minutes a session. Guys, we're going to do more of this, but like Jesus, we're coming back. Hey, we're talking to author Daniel Bush, Dr. Daniel Bush, about his seminar based on the book titled Undefended, Discovering God When Your Guard is Down. And I told you I was going to give you some information. This is going to seem crazy, but write it down anyway, because it's a different kind of internet thing because they're expanding it. Matthew tried to explain that to me this morning, and I didn't understand a word that he said, but write it down. It's simply undefended.life. Undefended.life.
What?
Undefended.life. There's no .com or .org. Write it down, try it, and you'll find that it works.
Well, you got it from Matthew.
Trust me on this. Yeah, well, and he got it from Dan. So if it doesn't work,
Okay, must be true.
go after Dan because he's the undefended.life.
So that was a great segue. At undefended.life, I'm going to make the assumption that there's a lot of information about the seminars and the technical kind of stuff that people would want to know, Dan, as far as scheduling and that kind of thing. Is people's awareness of that growing? How are the seminars going? Are you seeing more and more interest in it? Is it something that you're at the point where you're having trouble keeping up with it because there's so much going on, or do you still feel like you're in the beginning building stages, or what exactly?
Great question. We are in the beginning building stages. We've had one seminar so far. It was a wonderful weekend, prolonged weekend, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and we've been waiting really for this big kickoff with Steve to kind of launch it nationally and get people interested in hearing about it. So, excuse me, really thankful for Steve's encouragement with all of this. But like you said, we are in the beginnings of kind of rolling this thing out, and we're excited about what it will mean to so many people. We had lots of comments at the seminar of people that were like, I never looked at my religion this way before. I never looked at my faith this way before. I never really paid attention to the presence of God. And one lady came to me crying. And, she was going through a difficult time in her family. And but this made so much sense to her. And it made so much meaning to her heart. And there was healing going on just as she was hearing the words and discussing about what God may be doing in and through her own story. So we're rolling it out, and we hope it'll affect a lot of people for good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's get down and dirty. We've started with the issue of safety. If you don't feel safe, you're probably going to stay sick. If you don't feel safe, you're probably not going to find a lot of help for your insecurities. And you address that. You might want to say a little bit more about it, But let's address some other issues too. You want to say more about the safety issue?
Well, I mean, our biggest fear in life is that we're not safe. So if you think, go into any problem one has and drill down deep enough, you'll find a fear, and you'll find an issue of safety beneath that. Connection, attachment, all of that's related to safety. Think about how defensive we are when someone criticizes us. Why? Safety.
That's true.
Yeah.
But in the seminar, do you address things? What about people who come there feeling really guilty about where they've been, what they've done, what they've said? Is there anything about grace that will make a difference in their lives?
Well, the entire seminar is about grace. This is a grace-centered, Christ-centered, gospel-centered seminar. In fact, one of the things we do in this seminar is from beginning to end, we bring a Christ-centered, grace-centered, gospel-centered gospel message into how we are dealing with everything. If the gospel is what it is, then think about that. I'm fearful of God because of my sin, because of my guilt. That fear is what? I don't feel safe to stand before him. You need what? The gospel of grace.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're working it. It's dribbled throughout, Steve. It is the core of which my entire theological bent is grounded.
That's good. And that can be life-changing in people's lives. Do you get a place where people begin to look in the mirror and discover who they are? You know, a lot of the things that we deal with are unknown to ourselves. We don't even know where it is. For instance, in your psychotherapy sessions, you're going to places where people have not gone, are not aware of, and have not dealt with. And I was wondering if maybe, and we'll make this a teaser for the other side of the break, but I was wondering how you deal with something like that in a seminar like this. If you want to find out something about the Undefended seminar, trust me and Matthew and Dan on this. The website is undefended.life. That's undefended.life. And we're talking with Dr. Daniel Bush. He's pioneered a unique integrated approach to Christian psychotherapy. And forget about the psycho part. He's safe. Thanks for spending this time with us. We're talking with Dan Bush about a seminar based on his book called Undefended, Discovering God When Your Guard is Down. And in case you hadn't heard, the 2024 edition of our print magazine is now available. It is great. And if you don't like it, it's free. So you just keep your mouth shut. Don't complain. You can get your copy today just by visiting keylife.org/free magazine.
Dan, you know, we were talking about how the book translated to the seminar and broke out again across, 4 different sections. And I think this is one of the things where you don't really need to sell somebody on the seminar. If you've got somebody who's just hitting their head against the wall, they hear something like this and they're like, I get it. I need some outside perspective to kind of get some of this stuff kind of unpacked and sorted through, which of course is what, counseling is all about. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how the sessions, break out across those 4 different windows.
Sure, no problem. And one of the things that Steve was saying before the break was like, what is there in this for people, And well, I begin, people have different issues in their life, but and some may not even know what issue they have. Things aren't working. So, because the seminar touches a lot of different areas, some people are going to find that that's an area that they're knowingly wanting to hear about, and other people are going to have those questions put to them, and they're going to begin to explore it, and they might realize, oh, yeah, that's an issue that was down underneath there that I didn't know. You prompted me to begin thinking about that. But the first seminar talk really lays the groundwork. We need some, use a fancy word here, prolegomena, a word before.
You made that
We
up.
need to kind of get into this seminar, into Christian spirituality. What is it? So the first seminar talk lays that groundwork on Christian spirituality. It brings up the issue of our fear and safety, and how does that connect with Christian spirituality, attachment, and all of that. In the second seminar, boy, I remember years ago when we were talking, and Kathy said, "I don't want to be vulnerable." And
Still
well, the
don't.
second seminar is all about vulnerability. It is about you can only connect when your guard is down. So we're going to go into vulnerability. There's some other things in there. And the third one begins to look at keeping up with that vulnerability. We begin to look at issues of our defensiveness, issues of our doubt and our sorrow. Sorrow and doubt and lament are all part of the fourth talk. Let me try to remember what the second part is about. Dropping your guard, being undefended, as it builds up from understanding Christian spirituality and vulnerability. We finally get in the third seminar to dropping that guard, looking at various elements in our life in which we can. What does it mean to drop your guard? What's that all about? And then we're going to go into issues of sorrow and doubt, pain, fear. All of these different areas are touched throughout the four. But you're thinking, huh, Matthew?
Yeah, I am, because it's so funny that I think about like how we're put together, and when something flies at our face, kind of reflexively, our eyes slam shut. The entire body is called into action to protect your vulnerable little eyeballs, and I think it's that way when there's a criticism or a bad memory or something or other. It seems like our hearts do that same thing, where we just immediately go into defensive mode, and I can't let this in because I don't.
Right.
Either you're right or you're, and I don't want to deal with that, or you're wrong, and I don't want to think through that part. It really does take a lot of work just to get to the beginning of this, right? To where.
Oh yeah.
Somebody's
Just
like,
to
I'm going to do this.
Get the groundwork laid to get people to open up, because we're going to go into those places that they're wanting to tense up. They're going to go into fight or flight mode, to lay the groundwork. Why is it safe to go there? Okay, let's go there now together, and we're going to go in there together. I'm going to lead us. You're hearing the seminar together. You're discussing it. This is a safe place. So you really have to have that ethos and pathos in the room. It's not a group therapy session. I'll make that clear. It's not a group therapy session. We're going to touch things that you're going to be thinking about. And if a church or a group that's putting this on wants to have breakout groups, they can get in there and discuss those things. That's very helpful. But you're right. People tense up. And how do we get them to drop the guard? I think explaining that you can be vulnerable, and vulnerability is the way to connect. It's risky. So we talk about the risk.
But you don't embarrass people in the seminer, do you?
Well, I don't call anybody by myself out.
So just embarrassing yourself.
Yeah, I embarrass myself all the time. Nothing's new.
Yeah, Dan, and I don't know whether there's a lot of time to unpack it, but obviously people have individual traumas, individual struggles, and so forth, individual situations. Have you noticed, though, that are there situations or times, maybe within churches, within the culture, things like that, where there are a lot of people having kind of a similar or common experience that there's a sort of a general trauma sense or something like that? Does any of that happen?
When times get difficult, um, whether it be COVID, whether it be the economy, whether it be the talk of war on the horizon, whether people's works, stress comes in, tension comes in, and everybody feels that. It shows up in our marriages, in our relationships. Then we get a picture of ourselves. As we might double down to protect ourselves. Oh, that's right, we're correct. Or we might just turn around and beat ourselves up. I'm so bad, I can't believe I'm doing this. And we might go and look for any number of coping mechanisms just trying to get through. Marriage. I remember the church in Gainesville, Florida, that brought the seminar to them. Marriage is a big issue. That's an intense relationship, and that shows the signs of everything that's going outside of the relationship. It gets brought in, So there's lots of things that are on par with marriage too.
And the seminar addresses these issues directly. Let me give you that. That website again. It's undefended.life. Obviously, we just scratched the surface today. So go to the website, check it out. Might be something you'll want to do or be involved in. Maybe a seminar close to where you are. Dan, you're a good brother. Thanks for spending this time with us.
Thanks for inviting me, Steve.
Guys, we're going to come back for a short time and tell you who we're going to do it unto next week. And you are going to be shocked and amazed and feel unsafe. Somebody has said that we always say Jesus is enough. But I have a friend who says you will never know that Jesus is enough until Jesus is all you've got. And when Jesus is all you've got, then you know that Jesus is enough. We've been talking this past hour about the adequacy of God as we deal with the issues of life. We live in a very, very tough time. It's kind of scary and dark, and we're not sure what's going to happen tomorrow, and we don't like what's happening already. What do you do with that? Well, you do what Dan was talking about for this past hour. You recognize that God is enough, and that you don't have to defend yourself against Him because He's on your side. And you don't have to defend yourself any other places because He's your defender. And when those two things are true in your life, and that's what Dan's seminar is about, then all of a sudden you're free to make an obscene gesture, to say what you want to say, to be who you are, and to live a life without that basic fear eating away inside. When that's all you got, and it's Jesus, it's enough. And He really is. Thus endeth the sermon. I got to quit doing this.
I like them.
Yeah.
Now, just so you know, Kathy was sitting here a second ago, and she disappeared. And
said it would happen.
her chair over
knew
there
it.
is rotating a little bit, and we talked about it, and we think it was the rapture. And if you're still here, we're still here, but some people are gone. Actually, Kathy had an appointment she had to get to. So, Matthew, it's up to you to tell us about next week.
Next week's guest is one of our favorites. He's funny, he's talented, he's handsome. I feel like I have so much in common with him. Brant Hansen. He has a new book called Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance. Just the title puts a smile on my face, so I can't wait to talk to him again.
Hey, you guys, you're going to like next week's program. By the way, his book on self-righteousness is the best book ever written on that subject. And when he talks to us, you'll love it. And if you don't, you simply don't have any taste. Well, it's time. We've given you an hour of our best. And I recognize that it could have been better, but it could have been worse, too. Our fond hope is that you'll join us next week. Same time, same place. We'll be here. And between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.
If you don't like what you're hearing, at least you've got Jesus.
If I thought of that, I would have said that. Jesus is enough if you don't like it.
Yeah,